For well over a decade, and closer to 2 decades at this point, the Canadian government has been trying to figure out what to do with our aging fleet of CF-18 fighter jets. The fifth generation F-35 fighter jet by Lockheed Martin has been at the center of this debate, and it has essentially been a question as to whether or not we should buy the F-35 or look for a cheaper European fighter jet to bolster our fleet. Recently, it appeared as though the F-35 debate was settled. The Canadian government was going to go ahead with the fifth generation fighter and acquire 88 F-35s. 16 of those planes have already been purchased by the federal government. But early last week, the federal government claimed that they were reopening the contract and once again looking at how to proceed. Now, this prompted a royal visit from the Swedish king and queen and an official trade visit from the Swedish government to pitch to the Canadian government why they should proceed with buying the Gripen E fighter jet, a mixed fleet, some F-35s and some European Swedish-made Gripen E fighter jets. Now, I am not an expert in fighter jet technology at all, so I wanted to find two people who really know what they're talking about, two pilots who have sat behind the cockpit of both planes. In this video, you will hear from Swedish fighter pilot Mikael Grev and Canadian fighter pilot Billie Flynn. I should also stress that both men you are going to hear from today have previously worked for the manufacturers of each plane. Mikael Grev was a consultant with Saab after leaving the Swedish Air Force, and Lieutenant Colonel Billie Flynn was a global spokesman and senior test pilot for the F-35. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Joining me now is Mikael Grev, a former Swedish Air Force pilot with 17 years of experience flying the Gripen. Grev previously served as a consultant with Saab, the manufacturer of the Gripen, and is now the founder and CEO of Avionic, a Swedish AI firm developing missile simulation software for fighter aircraft. Mr. Grev, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Harrison.
So I want to just start, broadly speaking, about the technological capability of the Gripen. What are the benefits for Canada and the Air Force to pursue a mixed fleet that includes the Gripen alongside the F-35?
Well, I said that there's always there's always pros and cons with having a mixed fleet. I mean, if you don't have a mixed fleet, you kind of have a jack of all trades. So if you have an aircraft, you should do everything. And sometimes, like I think in this case, you can have one aircraft, that the F-35, for instance, that is good on deep strike and go deep into the enemy territory, and you can have the Gripen, which is really good for BVR combat and also for all kinds of different missions.
Joining me now to make the case for the F-35 purchase in Canada is retired Lieutenant Colonel of the Royal Canadian Air Force, Billie Flynn. Mr. Flynn, thank you so much for joining me. Can you first explain to our audience your personal background with the F-35 and your experience?
Harrison, thanks for having me on. I look forward to talking about the F-35. It's a saga and a story that just won't go away. My history. I am an Air Force brat. My mother and father both served in the RCAF. Father a fighter pilot, my mother a corporal, and in the Cold War days. And I spent 23 years in uniform. I was the first baby pilot picked to fly the CF-18, which I first flew more than 40 years ago. Cold War bases in Cold Lake, Alberta, NORAD alert in Bagotville. I was one of the first 4 that flew to Germany with the F-18. And then United States Navy Test Pilot School, 5 years at Edwards Air Force Base in California as a test pilot on F-16s and in NASA F-18s. Back to Canada as a squadron commander of an F-18 squadron. And I commanded the Canadian Task Force Aviano, affectionately known as the Balkan Rats, in combat 26 years ago in the spring of 1999, bombing Kosovo and Serbia. I retired to fly the Eurofighter Typhoon in the beginning of its lifetime for 4 years, and then came to Lockheed Martin to do F-16 and obviously F-35, which I flew for more than 10 years, all three variants, hundreds of hours in all. And I have a perspective that starts as that baby Canadian fourth gen fighter pilot through its years to now a fifth gen test pilot. I flew 4.5 gen fighters, which we're going to talk about as we compare to Gripen today. And I think that gives me a perspective of the beginning of the life cycle of an airplane, the revolution that comes with a new generation of fighter, and then really what it means in my time as a NORAD and NATO fighter pilot and commander in combat, what it means in both those roles, our alliances, but also what it means for Canada to go to combat in a fighter. So I'm happy to walk through this all.
Great. Well, we'll start with this, Colonel. I'll have you just lay out the case as to why Canada should go all in on the F-35, all 88 planes, versus what appears to be another option now on the table, which is a mixed fleet, some Gripen and some F-35. What's the case to go all in on the F-35?
And let's put some caveats on here. I've been talking about this for 20 years, 15 years in Canada. To everyone, right? To the politicians, to the press, and all over the public. And I can tell you that no one moves the needle in this discussion. In all the many years, as we've tried to explain this in consumable English, without all the classified conversations, without the technical jargon, we really haven't moved the needle. And today we talk about it because it's a really emotionally charged subject. It's driven by Donald Trump and the anti-American sentiment, not about capability or what it really means to the armed forces. But if we're talking about what it means to an Air Force, a small Air Force like ours, let's break it down in two terms: capability and capacity. And let's take me out of the equation and look at two real world cases this year when we talk about generational capabilities of fighter jets. In May of this year, in the latest Pakistan-Indian skirmish, the Pakistani Air Force detected and shot down a 4.5 generation Indian Air Force fighter from more than 130 kilometers away with a Chinese-made air-to-air missile. Okay, so a 4.5 generation fighter is a Gripen, or the airplane that I flew, a Eurofighter Typhoon. Okay, it saw that fighter more than 130 kilometers away, shot it down. Luckily, the pilot lived. Okay. In June of this year, the Israeli Defense Force, with their F-35s, flew hundreds and hundreds of miles all the way across Iran to attack and demolish the defenses around Tehran, one of the most heavily defended places in the world, with an F-35, with a fifth generation F-35. Followed shortly thereafter by the United States Air Force and their F-35s and B-2 bombers attacking sites in Iran. And in each case, those F-35s came and went effectively undetected. So on one hand, a 4.5 generation fighter seen at more than 130 kilometers, shot out of the sky, and fifth gen fighters not seen. When we talk about capability, about our military, what we're talking about is survivability. And you've talked to Andrew Leslie in the past, who's explained that Canada is no longer a peacekeeping nation. We are first strike nation. In the force that I commanded on night one over Kosovo and Serbia, Canadian F-18s were at the very front of the pack. We were before that in Gulf War I. We were in Syria and Libya. We aren't a peacekeeping nation. We are a peacemaking nation. Okay? We will be in the front. Are we telling ourselves that today we are going to risk Canadian men and women in a 4.5 generation fighter versus the survivability that really ultimately matters to Canadians in a fifth gen fighter? Okay, first case. The next part is capacity. Look, we have a landmass that's surrounded by three oceans and an unfriendly neighbor to the south. We have to protect our land. The biggest vulnerability against an attack from China and Russia comes in the Canadian Arctic, right? It's between Inuvik and Iqaluit, effectively, which is the two bases that we operate from in the far north. And we have the hardest part of the continental defense shared by us in America. We have the hardest part. We have the biggest territory. And what we need is capacity. We need every single one of those 88 F-35s focused to the north so that we can guard against them. We need the vast distances covered by the airplane, but also what our sensors can see. And the interoperability, and you and I are going to talk in detail about that, the network meshing between us and the American forces that are all protecting the north so that we can actually cover through that massive, vast swath of the Canadian Arctic, the most vulnerable part of the continent. So it's capacity and it's capability and capacity that we need to be focused on. When we ask ourselves, look at this point right now today, in this very emotionally charged discussion, what do we pick to move forward? Remember that F-18 I talked about? I flew this more than 40 years ago. It was a really impressive airplane at the beginning of its days, but it's old. It's old, and you and I are going to talk about Swiss Army knife analogies in a sec. Gripen first flew 37 years ago. It's a previous generation fighter. We're buying something for 40 years, okay? So whatever we buy has to last until 2065. Are we telling ourselves that we're going to invest the future of Canada in a fifth generation fighter that virtually all our allies fly? Or are we going to buy an orphan fleet that today, this generation of fighter cannot survive in a modern day combat example today, and we would expect that it would move ahead and keep us viable and give us the deterrent effect, especially in the Arctic, for the next 40 years? No one actually believes that that's the case.
The argument that goes back and forth between advocates of both airplanes is, the F-35 advocates will say, this is a fifth generation fighter. The Gripen is a 4.5 generation fighter, but the Gripen was put into service later than the F-35. Can you explain the difference between the generation class, the fifth generation versus 4.5 generation, and how that compares to the fact that the Gripen E was put into service later than the F-35?
Sure, I'll try to break it down. It's really complicated, but I'll do my best. So there is the notion of generations, and some of that is marketing speak, of course, because you want to be in the top generation. And I would say the only thing that differs the F-35 compared to the Gripens when it comes to generations is basically two things. And the one thing is stealth, and of course, if you have stealth, you want to be in that. Well, that's a fifth generation aircraft, and Gripen is not stealth. It has another kind of concept around EW, electronic warfare, instead. So that puts it in the 4.5. Though if you see what's in the sixth generation aircraft, that is usually touted to be something like high upgradability, very software defined capabilities, and a lot of AI and decision support. And that Gripen has that instead. So Gripen kind of bounces between 4.5 and generation 6. And I actually wrote a tweet about it saying, well, would that put Gripen in a 5.25 generation, because that's kind of the average between the two? Of course, generations is it's ridiculous because it's just one figure and it's so superficial. So generally I try to stay away from generations, but you need to counter it head on as well. You cannot hide from it.
Okay, and one thing we have heard from F-35 advocates is that the Gripen E, due to the fact that it doesn't have the stealth technology, might be outdated on the battlefield by the time Canada takes possession of the Gripen. Should we actually go ahead and purchase the Gripen? What's the counter argument to those that say the Gripen will be outdated on the battlefield and won't be able to stack up to our adversaries?
Well, I think it's kind of a ridiculous thing to say in one way, because we wouldn't buy and build the Gripens because we're having the same adversary. Actually, we have Russia really close. So we wouldn't build an aircraft that couldn't handle the Russians, and they have been our main adversary for generation, for decades at least now. So of course the Gripen will do extremely well against the opponents. And I mean the stealth technology, it's a two-edged sword, so to say, because your stealth, if you go in there deep strike, you want to stay away, you want to stay hidden. But as soon as you want to see something else, you need to open up your own radar. And when you open up your own radar, it's like lighting a flashlight in a dark room. Everybody will see where you are. They might not see exactly what you are, but they will see where you are. It can lock onto you with the EW suite and so on. So I'd say that stealth, well, it's an advantage. It's a big cost in maintenance and the things that you need to do to the hull in order to make it stealthy. So it's a good thing to have if you can have it. Sure, it's always good, but it's a lot of trade-offs, and it's not kind of the single, golden bullet for everything.
Let's talk about Arctic basing. Let's talk about the requirement for the aircraft in the far north. And you know what? Let's talk about cost per hour. Basing. There are 54 F-35As. Today, there are 54 F-35As based in Fairbanks, Alaska at Eielson Air Force Base, and they've been there for years already. In the harshest of climates, colder than Cold Lake, Alberta, colder than Bagotville, Quebec, colder than Goose Bay, Labrador. Let's face it, if you've ever been to Fairbanks, and I have, it's a deep freeze. Okay, so it's the same climate we're going to see in Iqaluit when we deploy north or in Inuvik. Period. Demonstrated today. Let's talk about what we really need for a fighter up there. What we care about is can we get there to our northern bases, and then can we fly and project force out into the Arctic in that just stunningly vast airspace that's out there, right? And so what we care about is range and endurance. Can I go a long way, and can I stay on station, just the platform itself? Can I just get there and then patrol to, deter and detect? There is, so there's 18,000 pounds of gas. That's how we measure the fighter pilots in an F-35A. That's 8,800 kilograms, when you do that quick math. There is 3,400 kilograms of gas in this. It's about 7,500, 7,200 pounds of gas. There is, so let's do some math here. It's real simple math. 2.4 times more gas in an F-35 than in a Gripen. Now, they're both powered by powerful engines. It's a General Electric 414 engine. It's the engine that ended up in the Super Hornet, Boeing Super Hornet originally, and now it's in the Gripen, about half the thrust of an F-35. And then we have this airplane that has a Pratt & Whitney engine. It puts out about 43,000 pounds of thrust, twice as much, but two big, powerful engines. I have 2.4 times more gas in an F-35. In an F-35, all my fuel is on the inside. On a Gripen, it's on the outside. I logically, it's pretty simple to see. There's more things hanging from the bottom of this 4.5 generation jet. There's more drag. It's going to take more power. I'm going to use up more gas to push myself through the sky. So do the math of 2.4 times of gas. And I'm not going to have the range. I can't go the same distance in a Gripen. It's just simple math. And I can't stay, when I get to where I need to be, I can't stay there as long. Oh, by the way, I'm going to leave Cold Lake, Alberta. That's our main operating base in the west. I'm going to go all the way to Inuvik. And I'm going to have enough gas that I'm going to go to that place I just talked about, Eielson Air Force Base in Fairbanks, Alaska, because I'm going to have enough fuel to divert just in case, right? And that that from Air Canada flights and WestJet, we always talk about, or you often hear about aircraft having to divert to another airfield if the weather gets bad or something goes wrong. And we always have to have that in fighter jets. In an F-35, I leave Cold Lake, Alberta, and I fly all the way to Inuvik, and I have gas to go to Eielson Air Force Base in Fairbanks if I need it. In a Gripen, I have to go from Cold Lake to Yellowknife, stop, get gas, then go to Inuvik so that I'll have enough gas to divert at the same time.
One of the things that we hear from Saab in their promotion of the Gripen, specifically to Canada, is that the plane is designed to handle harsh climates, particularly Arctic climate that we share with Sweden. Can you explain a bit more about what that looks like in practice? The Gripen's ability to operate in harsher Arctic climates that would likely be used in a worst case scenario in the defense of the continent?
Sure. I mean, it's always been a requirement for Swedish aircraft since they are operated in the northern part of Sweden, where it's minus 40 degrees Celsius during the winter, that it needs to work there. And I've been flying a lot in the northern parts, and it actually, all Swedish aircraft has always worked beautifully up there, and they need to be standing outside on the flight line for extended periods, and you just need to start them up, and they should go. So that's one thing. And another thing is that I know the Swedish procurement agency, FMV, we kind of jokingly say that, well, it needs to be, first on the moon and then at the bottom of the ocean and so on. It needs to clear all those obstacles. And that goes for aircraft as well as, all the other equipment. And the third thing is that since we are a small country, we are quite close to Russia. We know that we are probably going to need to be fighting at our own territory, meaning that we have had the Gripens on dispersed airfields and the Viggens before that out in the woods, with very harsh conditions. And also we need to keep them in the air. That's why it takes only, I think it's like 7 minutes to do the turnaround. When you have landed, you tip out as a pilot and another pilot tips in, or you don't even turn off the engine, you just quick refuel it. So it's kind of the Swedish way to have it really fast turnaround and harsh conditions.
What else matters in this? Does it cost less money for a Gripen? They don't cost the same. Okay, this costs more to operate than this does. But let's make sure we understand we're talking apples to apples. Both of these airplanes are powered by very complex fighter engines, right? The Gripen has a 30-plus-year-old technology engine, the F-35 a 20-year-old technology engine, but they're very complex engines. We have radar systems in the front that look and send out energy, and they're very, very complex. We have computers that run the flight control systems. We have hydraulics, we have oil that runs through the airplane, and all of those take servicing. Yes, it is the case, and we often talk about how you can land a Gripen and a 19-year-old conscript can refuel it, open the fuel panel on the side, put fuel in the airplane, and the Gripen pilot can take off again. But you can do that in a CF-18. You can do it in an F-16. You can do it in an F-35. If that's all we had to do. If we say that it's $5,000 an hour per hour for a Gripen, I think we're ignoring that I told you there's 3,400 kilograms of fuel. That's 4,250 liters of gas. Go to the gas station in Toronto and buy the highly specialized aviation fuel or premium gas at $1.5, $1.50 per liter. That's $6,000 just in gas alone. And by the way, I have to maintain that super sophisticated engine, the complexity of the avionics, the computers that ran the flight control systems. I got to put oil and hydraulics. And all of a sudden, there is no way that the little airplane is $5,000 an hour. And Saab themselves have been quoted to say it's $22,000 an hour US at 1.4 on the dollar. Guess what? That's more than $30,000 an hour. So at least let's get ourselves close. And take me out of the equation. I'm going to come back to it at the end. If we really wanted to know how much the experts in Canada thought about how to sustain a fighter jet and how much it costs, we ran the most heavily scrutinized competition in any nation was done in the future fighter competition. And those results are what the politicians and the Canadian public have a right to see through freedom of information. Just tell us. The experts at the Department of National Defense, who had no vote on this other than to assess based on their expert experience on the criteria, let them tell us how much it costs. And then let's decide at the end which is worth. I guess I will be finishing saying, if I flew a 4.5 generation fighter and it got shot down, that pretty much wipes out any savings of cost per hour analysis between an F-35 and any 4.5 generation fighter.
I did some research, just wrote an article on this recently, actually today. So I did a bit of research, but of course everybody is keeping the figures close to their chest. But there is the purchase price is approximately the same. Some say the F-35 is a bit more expensive, but then the F-35 prices are coming down as well. And the Gripen is a newer aircraft that's just been released, so it's really hard. And there's also always, what do you include in the initial price? The big difference, I think, is that the F-35 is about 4 times as much when it comes to cost per hour. And actually, the cost per hour, given the usual 8,000 hours of time that you put into an aircraft before you scrap it, is kind of the biggest part of the cost for an aircraft. So the F-35 is a bit more than twice as expensive, I would say.
Could you explain to us, Colonel, what the argument that we are hearing about how the United States will be in control of software upgrades to the F-35 and weapons integration to the F-35? I'm not under the assumption that if there was ever a time where we needed it, the Americans wouldn't give it to us, but the fact that we wouldn't have full control over the proprietary technology of our own airplanes seems to me to be, well, it seems to be alarming for some Canadians. Can you explain to us why that is the case and what Canada will not have control over when we do ultimately purchase these planes?
And what we'll have control of, right? So a couple of things. We're past the kill switch conversation. We know the commander of the Air Force has explained to all Canadians, there's no kill switch that Donald Trump owns. We got that, right? For the first time in history, any nations outside of the United States were allowed to have the spy capability, the true black world capability of American fighters. Look, Canada flew CF-18s, and I flew Canadian Marine and Navy F-18s, A, B, C's, and D's in my career. Oh, by the way, the Marine Corps and the Navy flew F-18s that had capabilities that Canada never had. I flew F-16s as the test pilots, A, B, C, D, E, and F models. The Europeans that flew the F-16 didn't have the same capability as the American fighters did, plain and simple, and I've flown them all. For the first time in history, everyone in this partnership was allowed to possess the lethality and the amazing capability of the American fighters on par in the F-35 as partner nations, right? A Canadian, a Brit, a Dutch, an Aussie, F-35, an American, all the same. First time. But it means that you have to protect that, all that data with cyber systems and IT systems and classifications that none of us that everyone who's non-American ever even knew existed previous to this. Well, we kind of knew they had something special, but we certainly were never let into that game. And for the first time in history, we are. The dominance of F-35 is because it's 15 years ahead of anything that China and Russia can develop. And the only way that we protect that 15 years of technical superiority is making sure that nobody hacks into that data. So how you build the infrastructure here, how you manage cyber, how you manage all the IT, how you manage all the systems, all the maintenance is so tightly controlled because we can't have the Chinese hack into some very poorly band-aid Canadian military IT system, or in Belgium, or in Denmark, or in the Netherlands. Everything has to be protected at a level that none of us ever imagined. Can we program unique Canadian capabilities? Well, we do, because we are part of the Australia, Canadian, and UK reprogramming lab located in the panhandle of Florida at Eglin Air Force Base, where the three nations get to focus on all the systems in the airplane and make sure that they are tied and focused on the kind of threats that would be unique to where our nations would be deployed. If we're not going to the Middle East, I don't need a software load that's focused on Middle East threats. I'm worried about Russia in the north, or in Central Europe. I'm worried about what's on the other side of Poland, like the UK would be. That's where we get to program. Do we have a vote? We have always had a vote in the F-18 world. From the very beginning, we Canadians sat with Marine Corps, Australian, and US Navy pilots all together and engineers, and we all collectively got to vote on what we thought was important for future upgrades. Everyone had a vote, and things that were important in Canada that we got into the airplane over the years were not important. They were not important to the United States Navy, who was more focused on landing on an aircraft carrier than they were about being exactly time on target in Central Europe like we were. So it just wasn't there. We had to convince everybody of the importance of that. It also, that same voting scheme happened in the F-16 world for all the F-16 users, American and foreigners. And we have that same thing through the Joint Program Office and the collaborative work. This is an international program. I know it seems very dominant. We're very anti-American focused right now, but don't forget that there are parts made for every F-35. There are Canadian parts made from Delta, BC, now all the way to Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. They're made in manufacturing in Magellan, in Winnipeg. They're part of Honeywell. They're gas tops in Ottawa. They're in Montreal. All across this country are part of the F-35. And if you thought that America could shut us out, then all of a sudden the parts don't come to keep them working, which is why the experts remind everybody that it's an international program. Do I want to be separate and own the ability to do all the programming on my own? What Canadian industry do we have that's so super sophisticated that's the equivalent of what this F-35 program brings to Canada? Look, the Chinese that have been building airplanes now for decades cannot accomplish that. What did we think we were going to accomplish? So I'm going to finish by saying, for the first time in history, we have the most lethal survivable airplane in the world. And that's what we want our men and women to use. That's what we want as deterrence from the Russians and the Chinese when they look at the Arctic and decide they want to encroach on our territory. That's why we want an F-35.
Is there any proprietary technology in the Gripen E that Canada would be unable to control, including potential upgrades to the plane, the same way that the United States would have control over software upgrades to the F-35? Because the sovereignty angle is being addressed more frequently in Canada now with this unstable relationship we have. So is there any level of technology that Canada would not have complete control over in the Gripen like we would with the F-35?
I can't speak for Saab actually because, well, I'm not an employee and I don't have anything to do with them basically. But I don't think so. Since we are comparatively small, both as a country, and Saab is small compared to Lockheed Martin, they cannot have those kind of lock-ins. That would be impossible. Also, you need to go the other way. If the F-35 is like that, we need to be completely open. So it would surprise me tremendously if there were some kind of lock-in. Of course, I mean, you always might need spares, for instance. So you can argue with it that, well, spares, you can keep them from the customers, but the customer can always buy spares ahead of time and so on. And Sweden would, it would be very un-Swedish to do that, if you understand what I mean, to kind of deny a country or something like that because of political reasons and so on. It's been unheard of.
You've heard the case made by Mikael Grev, the Swedish fighter pilot who has flown the Gripen for 17 years and was a consultant for Saab as to why Canada should consider having a mixed fleet with Gripen E's. And you've heard from retired Lieutenant Colonel Billie Flynn, a man whose combat record in Canadian uniform is substantial, and someone who is intimately familiar with the technology and the capability of the F-35 Lightning II. If you like this video and you want to see more content about Canada's military, be sure to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please share this video with your networks. It really helps get the videos to more people. Thank you all for watching.